interesting to me personally to know what it was that we did before we were able to find our niche in this industry, because many of us come from places that aren't necessarily traditional. Some of us come, like me, not from a film school background, but from somebody who started at the very bottom of the industry and slowly over a century worked my way up. So there's all kinds of ways to make a career here. And what's really neat is to see us at different times in our lives come together here and share. I'm going to start out right here. My name is Nancy Pitts. I'd like to welcome you to the Franklin International Indie Film Festival. This is our first panel of the festival with hand-chosen people who I really admire. And I'm going to start by introducing our moderator who comes to us from London, England. Kate Kinnenmont. Kate is an award-winning producer and director. She's passionate about developing female-led film and TV projects. Though she started out in radio, she moved to the BBC and started directing film and television projects. She's an honorary associate of the London Film School, a visiting professor at the University of Hertfordshire, and was awarded a doctorate in creative arts honoris causa by the University of Bournemouth. She has a BA from the University of Strathclyde and an MA from the University of Glasgow, and is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. Kate was the CEO of FIIFF2020 UK Women in Film for 11 years and was awarded an MBE for her campaigning work for women in the film and television industry. She's a member of BAFTA, of Directors UK, and co-chair of the Advisory Committee of Women in Film and Television International. Since January 2019, she's been the managing director of the F Word Media Company. Welcome, Kate, and I'm going to turn this over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Nan. I'm very excited to be here at Tennessee International Film Festival from my own little house in London. I'd like to ask each member to introduce themselves because we have got a fantastic panel here. We have Jennifer Galvin, who is a scientist who became a filmmaker just so that she could get the message out to a lot more people. Jennifer, why on earth would you want to become a filmmaker when you're a proper scientist?
Well, to meet people like you all, I think first and foremost, amazing women telling stories all across the planet. I actually see a lot of common threads between science and storytelling, and in fact, that was the common denominator for me. Is that as a scientist, I was constantly looking for ways to put a narrative to my numbers and to be around a table with fellow scientists or the general public and help explain what we were doing in a given place, why we were studying it, why we needed to draw people's blood, things like that. So it all came back to story. And I was always a really visual person. And so started tinkering more and more with cameras and the rest is kind of her story.
And also here beside me is Darius, who is representing Synapse publisher and entertainment business. And you're a scientist too.
I am, although I'm just here really as a host, not so much as a panel participant in this one. But yes, I share Jen's love of the story in medicine and clinical for many years, but always was an entertainer and involved in the business. And so when Synapse was formed, I sort of brought those talents and skills along with me and have been so pleased to work with many, many talented women and others in the film industry and in the music industry. So very excited, but thank you for the mention. Appreciate it.
We really appreciate you being here, so thank you. Now, Natasha, not content with just being a producer, not content with being executive director of the London International Film Festival, you somehow also managed to be director of the Los Angeles International Film Festival. How do you juggle all that?
Hi, everybody, and thank you for having me. Yeah, so the Los Angeles International Film Festival we launched it this year, so it's brand new and it went very well. So I think when you're a filmmaker, you do so many different things to support each other, and festivals is a great way to all come together and celebrate each other and help each other. So that's why I get involved with that.
Well, that leads us nicely into Susan McAvoy, who's been doing a lot to help the women in the film business. Not only a writer and producer with the Brass Rocks Productions Company, but past president of the Utah Women in Film organization and past secretary and treasurer of Women in Film and Television International. So the international group owe you an enormous debt of gratitude. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
And then we have Robin. Robin, president of Women in Film and Television in Atlanta, Georgia. And when you lived in New York, you were also on the board of Women in Film in New York. I mean, you're just gathering them up. And now you're on the Women in Film and Television International Board. And in your spare time, you're a top-level strategist at Warner Media. I mean, what is it with women? How do you manage it all?
Well, you know, with us, we can do it all. So that's okay. It's, you know, we have the titles, we can do it all. But really, I got involved with Women in Film because of my corporate storytelling roles. I realized that, you know, while I sit in this role, in a corporate role, there are, you know, independent women filmmakers and producers and all the craft folks who don't get the support that they need. Meanwhile, I'm sitting in an organization where I had a budget and I could, you know, I could offer my expertise. I could, you know, write some checks to help women in films organizations. And that's how I got involved. And so in my spare time, I do also consult on film projects. And it's been interesting to see how my worlds have all kind of meshed together with the focus being, you know, women in film.
Yes. And then we're going to fly over to Paris, where we have Jenna Suru, who's executive director of the Paris International Film Festival. And again, in your spare time, you have written and produced your latest film, The Golden Age, which I believe is going to be screened here next year. Yeah.
Hi, Kate. Bonjour, everyone. Thank you for this great intro. I'm very pleased with the topic of the panel today, may I say. Thanks so much, Nancy, for choosing that topic. It's really important for me. And thank you, Kate. Yes, I love paying tribute to women. I make films about artists struggling with acceptance of their role in the world, and that obviously involves women. So I love paying tribute to them in my films and also here in Paris at the festival.
Oh, that's excellent. So here we are, international group of female jugglers who are doing all of this. And we all look as if we're thriving on it, which is great. Now, I wanted to do a little bit of an introduction to the female gaze because I'm of an age way before there was even film studies thought of. So I've been doing a bit of research so that I can understand it. And I thought it might be useful for the audience just to put perspective on what the female gaze is. So when you think back, the very first narrative films were made by women. Alice Guy Blaché over in your neck of the woods, Jenna. And that was fine. It was something ladies did, like they wrote novels and they made little films until it became an actual business. Banks got involved, financiers got involved. It was headquartered in Hollywood and nobody wants to invest in women, for goodness sake. They could be assistants and lovely helpers and men took over. And from that point on, things really changed. Now, the British Film Institute did a fantastic piece of research over 100 years of filmmaking. And they looked at 10,000 UK films going from 1911 up to the present day. So what was the most common name in film titles over 100 years? Now you might think the, you might think you might think of. No, it's the word man. The word man appears, believe it or not, 221 films have man in the title, from The Man Who Had Power Over Women, that's a good one, The Straw Man, Man About Dog, and The Railway Man. Only 71 films, over 100 years of films, have women in the title. A Woman of No Importance, The Invisible Woman, and The Impossible Woman. So are we getting a bit of a message here? I think we are. Gina Davis does fantastic research. We brought her over to London a few years ago, and she's all about female representation on screen. And she said, according to the most recent research on the top 100 movies, female characters account for just over a third of speaking time. So we're the gender who are like 51, 52% everywhere, but on movies, we speak for a third of the time. And we appear on screen for 39% of the time. So that's a wee bit more. So we're sometimes there, we're not speaking, you know, that's something. But here's a great stat. Women are 6 times more likely than male characters to be shown in revealing clothing. So, you know, what is that saying? So back in 75, the academic feminist Laura Mulvey introduced this idea of the male gaze to try to explain all of this, why it was that women were more often seen as victims, why they didn't speak so often, why they weren't the main part. And she said, the male gaze is what happens when a film is made, because it's coming from men taking control of every scene. The women are just there to be observed. They're objectified. And she said, the male gaze is the gaze of the male viewer, the gaze of the male character, and the gaze of the male creator of the film, the director, producer, camera person. It would have been cameraman mainly then. So that explains that. And then the amazing Jill Soloway, who's probably best known for writing and directing Transparent, in Toronto 3 years ago, came up with the idea of the female gaze. Let's start to look at the female gaze to see if there's a different perspective. If the filmmaker is a woman, does that make a difference? So we're going from women being the only people who are interested in making narrative films, then it becomes a business and the men are running it, with so many films about much older men, and their wives would be the age, not of the producer's first wife, but maybe of his third or fourth wife, you know, like getting 10 years younger all the time. And so it's very much a male perspective. And what the amazing Jill Soloway was saying, and I watched her talk online and she was terrific. She was saying, we have got to look at films. We use the female gaze as a critique. Now, my question to you is this just an academic exercise? So we've got 1975, an academic comes up with the idea of the male gaze. And then 3 years ago, somebody comes up with the idea of the female gaze. What does that actually matter to the viewer? Now, I thought it might be interesting to ask the people who are doing film festivals, for example, Natasha. I'll start with you because you run 2 film festivals, you know, that's a point of view. Whenever you're choosing films for your festival, does the phrase the female gaze, does that matter? Or do you just think, oh, here's one about this, here's one about that? How would it impact you?
Thanks, Kate. Yes, I do very much support films made by women, female filmmakers, also female stories. So Jenna Saru, who is on the panel here, she had the opening night film at the London Independent Film Festival last year. And the previous year, we opened with a film by the Shakespeare sisters called Soundtrack to 16. And I really feel like this is something that needs to be supported and promoted worldwide, because stories that are told by women are much more likely to have female central characters. And also all the funding and all the support for women increases the more stuff that is being shown as well. So the more female filmmakers are recognised at festivals, the more opportunities there are as well. So I feel that it's something that we as festivals can really help to make a difference.
Well, Jenna, in your film festival in Paris, how important is the notion of the female voice, the female gaze?
extremely important. And thank you so much, Natasha, for mentioning, because we had such a brilliant opening line with the Golden Age, which also pays tribute to women. And here at Paris, it's something that's also really important for Paris City. Female gaze is extremely important, and also not just the female gaze, but really female gazes, or just because female gaze can come from such unexpected ways. It can also come sometimes from male view, as you say, from a male character. So it's something it's extremely rewarding to actually select those films, as Natasha says, because our audiences are craving for new content, for new voices. And as you mentioned, for a long time, female voices, female gazes has not been helped, but also Alice Guy, thank you so much for mentioning her. She was recognized by Léon Gaumont. I'm very, very thankful. One of the first companies I worked for was Gaumont. And her film, I think in English, it's called The Fairy of a Cabbage.
Yes.
Was
the Cabbage Fairy, yes.
And it happened just the same year as the Frères Lumière in Lyon with the train, the short with the train. And she's also the first director who has ever filmed with Black actors. She's such a pioneer. And as you mentioned, Kate, it's so important to the work that we do at festivals, like Natasha does at festivals, are really important, because if we don't recognize this work, it can be very easily erased by history, just erased. And I really want to also mention a philosopher I so much admire, and I think she makes so much sense. So her name is Iris Bray, and I love the way she talks about the female gaze, because it's very recent. She's also American and French, so she really has that double perspective. And she mentions, because we talk a lot about media, the power of media, but it's not just about films, it's not just about characters. And Iris Bray, she explains very well that, for instance, in Game of Thrones, and it's probably a series we love, that many people love, but when the director and the actors don't understand that the rape scene, because it's a rape scene with Cersei, when there is a female in the scene that says no during, when it happens, that's a rape. And apparently neither the director or the male actor understood that. That's a very big responsibility. And this is why female gaze is very urgent. It's necessary, it's essential, it's really urgent.
Can I move to Jennifer? Jennifer, you're a scientist, and so you work very much in facts and theories and things. Do you think the female gaze in filmmaking is something that's important to you?
It is. It's extremely important. I mean, from a scientific perspective, a lot of medical discoveries came from working on women without their consent. So I think, when you're including women from a filmmaking perspective, both behind the camera and in front of the camera, I think it's all about agency and also bringing a different spectrum of emotion and experience. So I do. I think it's everything.
Yeah. And Robin, thinking about your side hustle at strategy at Warner's, is there an awareness of all of this at the big studios now?
Yeah, I think there definitely is. And what's interesting is when you talk about like the female gaze from a corporate perspective, it's interesting because they're always talking about kind of like diversity. And when people think about diversity, it's more or less like people of color. And I'm always like, all right, but don't forget the women, because, before diversity, in corporate America, white women, that was like the check off the box. Fast forward a couple of years, now it's people of color. And so for me, sitting in on all of the calls, all of the development calls, when Warner Brothers has some ideas, or HBO and HBO Max, I'm always like, don't forget the women and the women's perspective, and make sure you get women-centric scripts, and make sure you have people who are the supporting cast is a lot of women, because we really change the whole tone of how things get developed and how they really actually look on screen, whether the small screen or the big screen.
Susan, you've been involved in the women's movement in film and television for quite a while, as I have. And do you see any difference now? You've met a lot of women, you've worked with a lot of women over the years. Do you think it's getting any easier for women?
I think it's still very difficult, but I do see changes coming, and things like what we're speaking about today with the female gaze opens that up to a lot of people to say, oh, wait a minute, I'm a writer. I think I need to change this, or a producer or whatever. So yeah, I do think things are moving slowly, but they're moving.
Jenna, your movie is coming out at the Tennessee International Film Festival next year. Can you tell us about that? And I'm assuming that it may have a female lead, possibly, does it?
Kind of, yes, which I'm very, very, very glad to interpret in the Golden Age. And thank you for mentioning, and thanks so much, Nancy, for the invitation, because yes, it's what I really love about the Golden Age is that it's a film that's been made with a very, very original production system, especially in France, because I'm the only producer. I directed it, I'm the lead, and I also wrote. And it's been produced in a very original way for France. And this is why we made the headlines of Écran Total last year, which is the equivalent of a Hollywood Reporter. And it's a very important film for me because I still consider it. It really changed my life. It's a film that really pays tribute to women over history, because it tells the story of this actress in Paris in the 60s. And it was filmed in 35 exceptional locations across the French Riviera, Paris, also a bit Los Angeles. And it's a story about the artistic journey and the struggles of an artist. And I think it's important that through the festivals, as you do here, and also through the films, we really care enough about our audiences to really tell them the stories they need, not just the stories we want them to hear, of the stories that have been told before, but just the stories that really show strong characters, strong females, that show also males, because as you say, the female gaze, it's so complex. It's not just talking about strong females, it's also showing, I'm not gonna give any spoiler about the film because it's gonna screen at the festival, but it's also showing males in their more difficult moments, showing the power of solidarity, the importance of understanding mental health and the complexity of life. And I feel something that I think is important to mention is that the Golden Age was such a dream film to make. And I've been both motivated by the beauty of what we went through for the film, but also my anger, because when you're a young female filmmaker and you're not necessarily encouraged, like it's something that's not just abstract, it's something it's a daily violence, if you see what I mean. It's really difficult to be shut down. And I'm very thankful for the amazing support I got and all the amazing partners, Paris, Saint-Tropez, because they've been part of change with us. And I think this story, which is a bit more difficult, I really want to tell. And this is why with the festival, I use my anger, but like to really celebrate women, to celebrate female gazes as you guys are all doing. I think it's extremely important, and solidarity is really important.
Can I ask you something? You talked about support. It must have been quite difficult for a young woman like yourself without a huge amount of experience. You talked about all the locations that you had, 35 locations, and in LA. How did you get finance? Was that difficult? Were men lining up to say, here, young woman, here's your chance?
Thank you so much for mentioning. The film, I pretty much financed it all by myself. Wow. So this is what really changed my life. I went to my my clients who were employing me as a freelancer, and I told them, you have to double my check and a little more, because I had putting down the numbers of day and the budget I needed for the film. So I took a big risk, but I'm glad I'm good enough at what I do. So they said yes. So everyone was happy. And I know I'm really happy though, because I think even if I didn't get the funds at the time, I know it will happen. And I know that I learned so much along the line, and I'm so thankful still for the amazing support, because I still feel this film has already given me back more than I gave. And I think it's also a beautiful message to show how resilient women can be. Even if a door shuts down, you open another one. Mm-hmm. Even no matter the barriers, right? And I understand also, like, for instance, I'm really lucky because I was really, really good at school. And I feel for maybe someone like me who's first generation in the film industry, and we had a beautiful call with Nancy this week and we discussed all that, but who's not really good at school because she has dyslexia. What happens for her? It's like, or who comes from like another background. And I don't just want success, I want to see the change, and I want to push women and support women. And it comes with, you mentioned solidarity, and I feel sometimes we think it's very abstract. It comes with finance, but it comes with very simple things for those of us who are watching maybe today. Like if you have a sister, if you have a mother, if you have a neighbor, a female neighbor, do you support her? If you have a female partner, do you support her? How do you look at her? How do you share her work on social media? And the films that you like the most, who are behind them? We talk a lot about eco-friendly. We talk a lot about where we buy our clothes, right? But what about the films we buy? It's important to support females, and it comes with sometimes very, very small gestures.
Yes, well, thank you very much for that. Now, Jennifer, how do you make your films, and what is the kind of, if any, is a female angle apart from you being the filmmaker? Do you find women for the crew, or?
Absolutely. I always find that women know other women. When I'm working with teams or get hired by teams run by men, they don't seem to think of women first. It seems to be women who always say like, hey, we don't have any women on this crew. And do you know any? I'm like, yeah, I know a good handful. And in terms of getting films made, it takes all kinds of ways, whether it's your passion project that you have to figure out how to get funded, or getting hired by someone else to help create their vision. So it really is a kaleidoscopic system.
I think more and more women are making documentary feature films now, aren't they? Have you noticed that when you go to festivals and so on?
I think the documentary space has always been more female driven compared to the narrative space. But what I love is that I think more women are getting recognized as filmmakers, not just women filmmakers.
And Susan, do many people send you projects, women sending projects or things that you're making? Do you make a conscious effort to try to get women involved? Oh, you're on mute, actually, Susan.
Thank you. I thought I clicked that. I do get a lot of email from women who have projects, a lot of men also, but who have projects and they're wanting me to make them. We have so much in our company that we want to make that hasn't been made yet, especially this year. So I do reach out to them and have conversation back and forth about what they're looking for, what do they want to do. And, it's easy to just not answer an email, but I feel that someone's taken the time to contact me. I should at least reach out.
Yeah. And Natasha, you make films as well as do the festivals. How do you find it getting anything financed? How difficult is it?
Getting anything financed is difficult in the first place, I think, for everyone, let alone if you're a female filmmaker. And I think that's one of the problems, is it's so slow moving. And I think it was Susan who said that it is moving, but very slowly. And nowadays, there are more opportunities for women. There are funds that are dedicated to female filmmakers, and there are more women in different roles. So it is possible to have a more female crew than it was in the past. But I agree, it doesn't move quickly enough.
Yeah. And Robin, you've been involved in several parts of the United States. Do you have an awareness of women who are trying to get work made?
Yes. So like I said, one of my side gigs, not my real side gig, but is consulting on projects. And it was interesting to me that I got a lot of people coming to me for funding. And what I saw the difference is that women would take like any funding to get their project started, while men wanted the entire budget thing. You know, I've got the whole budget, I need all this. And so I thought that was interesting how the women like, just if you get me started, you find me some money quickly, like you were saying, if you find me some money quickly, I can at least get it going and the project will get underway. So yeah, I do see that. I do love like FIIFF. When I was there, you know, we had a fund specifically for women, you know, filmmakers. That's how I got involved. I would like write my check from, you know, Time Warner into that fund. So at least I knew that somebody's project could at least get started. So you do see a difference. You do see that women are hungrier to get the project started, so they, because we know that we could complete it, you know, once we get it started. So you know, I think that's going to be the biggest thing, like for moving women forward, is not just that you have so many women involved in a project, is that they have the funding to get it going and to complete the project.
Yes. I would like to ask each of you if you had a role model when you were starting out. Robin, could we start with you, since you're on?
So the role models in this industry, I would, like I said, I've been involved in television and more on the back end, the technical side of television. But who really were my role models were these hungry, independent filmmakers. So when you talk about Jenna, it was just like I know I'm working on a project, but you're gonna have to double my salary because I have a project to get made. That's what's kind of driven me in this industry. That's kind of made me kind of stay focused on the women in film mission, and then also, you know, truthfully keeping my day job so I have that kind of corporate business, you know, financial piece of it to contribute to the women in film industry. So kudos to the women filmmakers, you know, big projects, small projects, those are my role models.
Wow. And what about you, Natasha? Did you
Yeah.
have a role model or somebody who helped you at the beginning?
Not really specifically anyone, but all these kind of initiatives and people sort of helping each other out. I think all the women's initiatives, particularly, women really support each other, and I'm finding that more and more as I go through.
And Jenna, did you have much support from, did you have like a mentor or a sponsor or somebody that you could turn to and they would help you with the next step?
Definitely, in terms of role model, I would mention Cécile Gaget, who's been for about 10 years the head of international sales at Gaumont, and also more recently head of production, because I worked for her when I started, and she was definitely an inspiration as a woman, and for like everything she's really brought to the industry, and also her role in the industry, not just in France, but also Europe and the US. And I think it was extremely inspiring for me. And yes, as Natasha said, I would say definitely also just the collectives, like the ones that you guys run, like Women Film and TV across the various countries, I think are being really inspiring, because it always comes with the day-to-day basis, the day-to-day support. I would say they really are a daily inspiration, which is really, really effective and important.
Nan, did you have somebody who was a role model for you when you were starting out? You know, you could have been a teacher, you could have been a secretary, you could have been a nurse, but you went into movies. How did that happen? Oh, you're still on mute.
I started out in the television industry. I started out on a television show, a series that was being made. I was in college, and I was always interested in writing, and I went to school actually in French and English. And I was not as motivated as I thought I would be. I actually chose my college based on the ski resort nearby. But one day, I know, one day, my parents, we traveled a lot. My father thought the best education was travel. So we did great sales in different places in the world and traveled an extensive amount, which gave me a love and an appreciation for other cultures. And I'm also was raised in a old country family, as I like to call it. So that gave me another perspective to write a lot of stories. And when I got to college, I found that I didn't like academics that much, but I was reading an article and it said that there was a production company in Park City making a television show. Went up there the next day, walked into the office and said, I'll take any job there is. And trust me, I got the lowest job on the totem pole. And that was my start. But it was a well-respected TV show and called Grizzly Adams. And everybody that liked that gave us more and more opportunity. So we were able to stay on the network. And that was my start. I started out as a film runner, which is actually below production assistant. I would drive the film back and forth to set, drive people out to set, and slowly and surely I made friends within the company. And so I ended up in the writer's room doing research. And I said, this is what I want to do. This is exactly what I want to do. I want to be on that side of the camera. I want to be one of the people that makes it, as the French say, marche. I wanted to make it work. So, I've learned a lot through the years. It's a long career. I started this TV show was back when dirt was just first invented. So it's been a long road. But I've seen a lot of the changes, absolutely. I was in the harassment of females and keeping females down and doing a lot of the work that I never got credit for. But I always looked at it as just a stepping stone to that next place. And I felt that if I just imagined that someday I would be in that place where I was able to affect change and make a difference. And in 2018, I feel like I started, because in 2018, I signed a pledge for my film festival to be 50-50, meaning that we would make sure that we were 50% women and 50% men in terms of what we accepted into our festival. And I think that that's a small start, but I felt that if I can encourage filmmakers to also want to be involved with film festivals that are 50-50, that would be a good thing. And in 2019, Cannes signed off on being 50-50. So I think that was a huge leap in that direction. So a long story, Kate, but thank you. And I would like to ask, if it's okay, in these last couple of minutes, if the panelists would tell a little bit about where they live and what they're working on now, if they feel like it, and then let's turn it around and be able to ask Kate some questions. Okay.
Okay.
I'll start.
Yeah, go.
So I'm in Atlanta, which, you know, the production hub, the production hub. So like I said, it's interesting to see how, you know, for women in film, like how we really kind of need to rise to the top, because, you know, for us, there are a lot of companies like Marvel who come in and they do a really good job, but they come in and then they leave Atlanta, right? They come here to film and then they leave. So for me, it's like, okay, so I know that's happening. And, you know, I know we have like Warner Media's here, but I also know there are a lot of independent female filmmakers. So how do I take all of what I know, my involvement with women in film and international and Atlanta, like how do I get the women filmmakers here to kind of really bubble up? So they're the ones being talked about in the news. They're the ones who are being asked to give quotes and, you know, across, you know, globally about, you know, filmmaking and all. And then, you know, the flip side of that is with COVID now, how do we get women back to work in Atlanta? You know, and whether it's the women here in Atlanta are working in LA or New York, they're working. How do we get them back to work so that, you know, we can thrive as much as men have always thrived in this industry?
That's very good. Very good. Jennifer, what are you doing just now?
Sure. So in terms of film, I'm hunkered down in New York. I've been on the road for 15 years making films, really, moving to the story, trying to really come from a place of, you know, rooting in the place in which the story is coming from. But I've been back in New York really since the pandemic hit, and just decided to hunker down here to make sure that I take care of my parents. And, you know, there's not a lot of travel happening. So, and being from a public health background, I feel a strong sense of solidarity with my friends who are working on the front lines to do my part and not contribute to the problem. So, but I'm developing a few different ideas, a couple of doc series and one narrative. So,
Oh, that's great. Are
it's
you
kind of
allowed to
interesting
tell us
have to push
anything?
yourself creatively. Well, the doc series is around medical racism and medical experimentation. I've always been really interested by those themes and those stories. I think there's a lot of stories left to be told, especially now around the problems of COVID and the COVID vaccine. And the other one is, it also has a science thread to it, but it's about freediving or using freediving as a portal into a larger story. So kind of getting back to my roots of science a little bit. Just had produced a feature documentary called The Antidote about kindness, which was really an interesting challenge, quite frankly, to make a story about kindness. Usually documentaries are born out of problems and conflicts. And this was, you know, I was given the task to go, you know, make a movie about kindness and decency and community in America. So that just came out on Amazon, little shameless plug.
What's it called? I'm going to watch it.
It's called The Antidote.
The Antidote. Very good. What about you, Susan? Are you busy at the moment? How's life going with you?
Well, I live in Utah now. I'm from Boston originally. I've been here about 9.5 years, and I've started writing again. I kind of put that on hold for quite a long time. And I got the urge, with nothing much else happening out here in the industry, I'm writing a new script. It takes place in France.
Oh, wow. Well, I hope you shoot it in France, and we might know somebody who's...
So. It's in the Burgundy region. Yeah.
Oh, we'll all be over then.
Okay.
We'll come on the set. And Natasha, what are your plans just now? How are things going with you?
Yes, so at the moment, I'm working on a number of different things. So as we were talking about before, it was the first year of the Los Angeles International Film Festival this year. So I'm working on building that for next year. And also at the moment, the London Independent Film Festival is coming up in April. March, April is usually the time for that. So again, I'm working on those things. But I've also started working together with Cine XS, which is another, well, it's a festival and it's also a label. And the festival is cult cinema, and it's also conferences. So we had a lot of films that were made by women or with female characters, and the label, which it hasn't all been announced yet, but there's a few films on there, and they're all female directors as well. So that's very exciting. And alongside that, I'm also reading scripts. I'm always reading scripts, but because of the COVID situation at the moment, where we're in lockdown as well here in London, which is where I'm based in the UK, between London and Margate, which is a nice seaside town here. So at the moment, I'm just working out which projects to take on while we see where the industry is at next year.
Yeah. And Jenna, are you working on another film?
Yes, Kate, exactly. I'm in Paris right now. I'm working on my second feature film, which is called For the Love of Music. And no surprise, it's very female-led, it's very feminist, and it's a very, very exciting atmosphere to work on now. So working on the applications for the funds, working online producing for also more really, really exciting projects. And of course, watching the submissions for Paris Festival, which by the way are incredible. And again, filmmakers are showing how resilient they are with very powerful and meaningful messages.
Wow, the female gaze is definitely staring out of the screen now, isn't it? With all eyes. I think that's maybe, is that time to wind up now, Nan?
It's getting time to wind up right now, but is there any questions for Kate? Plus, I would like to connect you all afterwards in case you'd like to reach out to anybody. Which I know we'd all like to, we just need
Yes.
time. And with all the time we have at home, it's amazing we have no time. But our film festival is next week. It starts on the 2nd. If you get on to FIIFF.org, you'll be able to select any of the films that you're interested in watching by that day. So you can look at the program and then cross-reference and click on those films. But does anybody have a question for Kate? Because I'd like her to have any closing remarks that she'd like as well. Anybody with a question for Kate? Okay, Kate, you have just done a rock star job, but I'd love you to have a closing remark if you'd like any closing remarks, and then we'll say, see you soon, a biento.
I think for so many years we had the male gaze in cinema and we didn't actually notice. We took for granted that the woman had to be rescued. You know, it's like the old fairy stories. And it's only in the last few years, and thanks a lot to the academics, to the Laura Mulveys and to people like Jill Soloway, for actually finding a phrase that makes us stop and think. So I will always be, I'm just about to start watching all the BAFTA screeners for the BAFTA film voting. And I am going to be thinking the female gaze every time I look at something, because it's, you know, here, one of my board members when I was working at Women in Film, Sheila Hancock, she's an actress. She was married to John Thaw, who played Inspector Morse, and he was given a part in a TV series. She wanted to audition to be his wife, like his real wife is auditioning to be his wife. Yeah. And they said, no, she was too old. And I think they didn't split up over that or anything. Hell. But, you know, you could just see that that sort of fantasy world where women disappear at the age of 35 until they come back to be the old witch or something. And that's why people like Meryl Streep did that brilliant thing of giving the money, what was it, $40,000? It was something really substantial
for the women over 40.
To Women in Film in New York to run screenwriter training for middle-aged women to write about middle-aged women, you know. And it's just things like that that are quite simple. There are a lot of people, you know, who could really afford to do that. I think we should go around to all the people in the UK who've been given knighthoods, you know, all the sir this and the lady that, and we should get them all to dip into their pockets and help out with this. Because I think once you start thinking about it, then that is something that is going to change things, and then we'll get better female representation. We don't then have children thinking that maybe women just disappear from the age of 35 till they were 90 and they turn up as a witch in Harry Potter or something like that. It would be lovely for us all to see. And it's not just about women, it's looking at a more diverse thing than the white cisgender male, as they call it. I'm having to learn all these things now, all the phrases, but you know, it's about having other voices. And I think that's happening in television first. That's one of the terrific things that's happening just now with all these new young voices coming up. They're doing stuff for Netflix that it's making the BBC and all these other companies think, hey, they're all getting an audience. Maybe there's something in this. You know, maybe there are more than just white, you know, pale, male and stale. And I think you've all shown that there definitely is.
I love that. Okay.
Let's hear it for the female gaze.
Yes, I want to thank each and every one of you for this. It has been brilliant. I've been writing down notes. There have been some brilliant things said by each and every one of you. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for supporting the festival. And thank you for sharing your brilliant selves with FIIFF. Fourth year, on to next year.